You have 24 hours to demolish that eyesore or I'll have the sheriff at your doorstep. That was the first sentence hurled at me by the queen of the homeowners association, her voice cracking through the mountain air like a rifle shot. She said it with so much venom you'd think I was a criminal rather than a man just 3 days into building a modest cabin. I stood there, hammer still warm in my hand, the scent of raw pine and fresh sawdust thick in my lungs, as her perfume, sharp and suffocating, clashed with the clean mountain air. Her name was Victoria Ashworth. HOA president. Local tyrant. She marched toward me with a leather binder clutched against her chest like it was some weapon forged in a courtroom. Behind her, SUVs lined my gravel drive, their tires grinding against the stones as more neighbors gathered to watch. Clipboard warriors. The kind who smile at church on Sunday but sharpen their knives behind closed doors. She demanded I tear down everything. Said it violated community standards. She waved her papers like holy scripture, threatening me with fines, with courts, with humiliation. But what Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I held a secret that could flip her entire empire upside down. A secret so heavy that her threats weren't just empty, they were a fuse waiting to burn her world to the ground. Before I tell you how one phone call set off a chain of events that obliterated this HOA and exposed every rotten scheme behind it, let me rewind. Because this nightmare didn't start with a clipboard and a cease and desist, it started with me. A man trying to rebuild a broken life. My name is Marcus. I'm Marcus Brennan, 45 years old. Recently divorced. A once proud electrician who'd watched his marriage, his finances, and his dignity crumble all at once. My daughter, Emma, 15 and sharp as a whip, barely spoke to me after the divorce. She saw me as the man who couldn't hold the family together. I needed this land, not just to live, but to prove to myself, and maybe to her, that I wasn't finished. The land came from my late uncle, Silas Brennan. He was the family ghost. A man who vanished into the Colorado mountains in the early 1980s and only drifted back on rare holidays, smelling of wood smoke, diesel, and secrets. Everyone else dismissed him as the hermit uncle. But when his lawyer called after his death, telling me I'd inherited his property, I knew Silas had understood something the rest of us didn't. When I first set foot on that property, it felt like salvation. 5 acres of rugged paradise. Granite cliffs echoing with hawk cries. A creek whispering through smooth stones. Sage mixing with pine resin until the air itself felt like freedom bottled. There was a half-finished foundation, a workshop that looked like a relic from a frontier museum, and enough open sky to make me forget city smog ever existed. I cashed out my 401k, quit my city job, and came here with one mission: build a cabin. Something simple. Something honest. Something Emma could walk into one day and finally see her father not as the man who lost everything, but as a man who built something with his hands. For the first 2 days, it was bliss. The rhythm of hammer against wood, the bite of the saw, the sting of sweat running into my eyes. Therapy. The kind that costs nothing and heals everything. And then, she arrived. The angel of death in a BMW. On day 3, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Out of a spotless white BMW X5 stepped Victoria Ashworth, mid-50s, iron-straight posture, and an expression so cold it could freeze a river. She was dressed in designer, business casual, but the kind of casual you wear to intimidate, not to relax. Heels striking the earth with precision, perfume so cloying it made my stomach churn, she walked straight onto my property as if she owned it. "Are you the individual responsible for this unauthorized construction?" she asked, her voice dripping contempt. She said individual like it was a disease. I put down my circular saw. "Name's Marcus Brennan. This is my land." Her eyes narrowed like I'd just spat on her shoes. "This land falls under Pine Valley Homeowners Association jurisdiction. Your structure violates multiple community covenants, no permits, no architectural review, no environmental assessment. You are hereby ordered to cease construction immediately." I looked around at the endless wilderness. Not a single house in sight. Just mountain, creek, and sky. What community? I don't see one. She slapped a folder into my hands. Pine Valley HOA governs all residential properties within this jurisdiction. Your uncle signed these covenants. Therefore, you inherited his obligations. I scanned the paper. Date of formation, 6 months ago. My uncle had died 8 months ago. I raised my eyes slowly. How could he have signed this? Her lips curled into a smug smile. That is not my concern. What is my concern is your blatant disregard for our rules. You owe $2,500 in accumulated violation penalties. Remove all materials within 48 hours. Daily fines begin immediately at $500, doubling weekly. Then she leaned close, her voice dropping into something colder, sharper. Let me be frank, Mr. Brennan. This is not the kind of neighborhood where people in your situation typically thrive. I would hate for your daughter to be embarrassed by your failures. Emma. She'd researched me. She knew about the divorce, the money, my daughter. The mention of her was like a knife in my ribs. Are you threatening my family? I asked. Her smile never faltered. I'm offering advice. Don't make this harder than it has to be. She pivoted, heels cracking like gunshots on the stone, and slid back into her BMW. Her parting words echoed down the road, 48 hours, Mr. Brennan. I stood there, cease and desist in my hand, her perfume still clinging to the air, my cabin only half built. She thought she owned me. She thought this was the end. But Uncle Silas's words came back to me, don't let anyone push you around. I wasn't about to. The HOA Strikes Back Victoria didn't wait 48 hours. The very next morning, she returned. And this time, she didn't come alone. Her BMW pulled in first, gleaming in the morning sun like some kind of chariot of doom. Right behind it, a battered Honda Civic wheezed up my driveway and coughed smoke. Out stepped the saddest excuse for a lawyer I'd ever seen, Douglas Cranky. His tie was coffee-stained, his suit 2 sizes too big, and his briefcase looked like it had been patched together with duct tape and prayers. Victoria strutted forward, chin high, with the kind of confidence that comes from years of scaring people into submission. Mr. Brennan, she announced, you are hereby served with official legal documents. Cease construction immediately or face financial consequences. Cranky shuffled papers nervously, avoiding my eyes. His voice cracked as he read, pursuant to Pine Valley HOA covenants, you owe $15,000 in retroactive penalties. Furthermore, your ownership is invalid since you never received proper HOA disclosure documents during property transfer. I let the silence hang, heavy as a thundercloud. 15 grand? For building on my own land? The stench of Cranky's nervous sweat mixed with Victoria's suffocating perfume until it felt like poison in my lungs. I'll review this with my attorney, I said evenly, meeting Victoria's gaze. Her laugh was brittle, cold, like ice cracking on a winter lake. You can't afford an attorney, Mr. Brennan. Save yourself the embarrassment. She turned on her heel, dragging poor Cranky behind her, and swept off like she'd just won a battle. But the war was only beginning. Digging for the truth the minute they left, I got in my truck and drove to the county courthouse. The building smelled of old paper and buzzing fluorescent lights, the kind of smell that makes you feel history breathing down your neck. Betty, the clerk who knew everybody in the county, helped me pull the records. She leaned close, whispering over the property maps. Marcus, this looks wrong. These boundaries, they weren't drawn for the community. They were drawn to trap your land. The HOA had been formed 6 months ago, 2 months after Uncle Silas's death. The ink on the documents wasn't just fresh, it was impossible. Even worse, every HOA member listed was either related to Victoria or connected to her husband's construction business. This wasn't a community. It was a racket. I clenched the papers in my hand. Dead men don't sign contracts. My uncle couldn't have agreed to anything. Which meant their entire claim was a fraud. Time for my counterpunch. Enter Sarah Kim. I called Sarah Kim, a razor-sharp real estate attorney I'd heard about from an old buddy. Her office smelled of fresh coffee and ambition. She spread my documents across the table, her pen tapping as her eyes darted from line to line. This is legally impossible, she said. They can't retroactively bind a dead man. This isn't just sloppy, Marcus. It's criminal. I've seen HOA scams, but this one? It's brazen. Her eyes burned with fire. We're filing countersuits. Harassment, false claims, emotional distress. And we're investigating how they drew these boundaries. Trust me, they don't know who they just picked a fight with. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt the ground shift beneath me, in my favor. But Victoria wasn't done. Not by a long shot. She spread my documents across the table, her pen tapping as her eyes darted from line to line. This is legally impossible, she said. They can't retroactively bind a dead man. This isn't just sloppy, Marcus. It's criminal. Her eyes burned with fire. We're filing countersuits. Harassment, false claims, emotional distress. And we're investigating how they drew these boundaries. Trust me, they don't know who they just picked a fight with. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt the ground shift beneath me, in my favor. But Victoria wasn't done. Not by a long shot. 2 nights later, my neighbor Jake came over, a 6-pack in hand, his face tight with worry. We sat on the porch, the air rich with wood smoke and the sound of the creek trickling in the distance. She's poisoning people against you, Jake said. At the emergency meeting, she called you a drifter, a criminal, said you had a record. People are scared, Marcus. The next day, I saw it for myself. A Facebook group, Pine Valley Community Safety. My photo plastered across it, captioned with words like predator, threat, dangerous outsider. The comments were venom: get him out. Protect our kids. Sheriff needs to act. It was character assassination. She wasn't just after my land. She was after my name, my blood, my family. But arrogance has a way of leaving fingerprints. In her rush to flaunt the HOA's strength, Victoria posted their financial reports. And in doing so, she exposed herself. Over $847,000 collected from just 12 households in 6 months. No projects. No amenities. No trail of where the money went. When I showed Sarah, she almost spilled her coffee. This isn't just fraud, she said. This is federal. Victoria just handed us the rope to hang her with. Corruption in high places. The very next morning, a county inspector pulled up to my cabin. His boots crunched nervously in the gravel as he handed me a citation. Multiple building violations. Orders from the top. Sorry, buddy. I could taste the corruption in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Victoria had pull in the county office. She was using government resources as her personal hit squad. That night, the war turned violent. At 3 a.m, the crash of breaking glass jolted me awake. The sharp smell of diesel stung my nose. I stumbled outside to find chaos, lumber scattered like pickup sticks, my generator overturned, gasoline soaking the earth, roofing nails glinting across my road like a minefield. By sunrise, all 4 tires on my truck were shredded. And in my inbox sat an anonymous complaint from the EPA, accusing me of destroying wetlands. Victoria wasn't just playing legal games anymore. She was trying to break me. But every escalation only made her sloppier. And sloppy people leave trails. The resort connection at the courthouse again. Betty helped me dig deeper. The smell of dust and coffee filled the air as we pieced together the truth. 6 months ago, a company called Mountain Vista Resorts had filed plans for a $50 million luxury resort. Golf courses, a spa, even helicopter pads. But they needed one thing, my 5 acres, as the centerpiece. Buried in the county planning documents, we found a $400,000 consulting fee. Sarah froze when she saw it. That's not consulting. That's a bribe. Suddenly, everything made sense. The rushed HOA formation. The harassment. The lies. Victoria wasn't just power hungry. She was a broker, trying to hand my land to developers for a cut. And every day I resisted was costing her millions. Caught red-handed, I wired up a security system that night. Motion sensors. Night vision cameras. If they wanted to escalate, I'd have proof. Around midnight, the cameras caught movement. A pickup truck crawling down my road, headlights off. A hooded figure got out, carrying a gas can. He started pouring it on my lumber pile. Then he looked up, straight into the lens. Tommy Ashworth. Victoria's son. The next morning, I walked into the sheriff's office with a USB drive full of evidence. The video was clear as day, license plate, face, everything. Victoria's empire started to crack. The hidden lockbox, and just when I thought I had enough, fate handed me something bigger. While prying up floorboards in my uncle's old workshop, my crowbar struck metal. Beneath years of dust and oil stains lay a military green lockbox. I spun the dial, using my uncle's birthday. The latch clicked open. Inside, manila folders, corporate seals, deeds. Documents that made my hands shake. Uncle Silas hadn't just owned 5 acres. Back in 1998, he had quietly formed Brennan Holdings LLC. In 2010, during the housing crash, he'd bought up defaulted mortgage debt. Not the homes, the land beneath them. Every single house in Pine Valley sat on ground he owned. And now, I owned it. Victoria's HOA kingdom? Her own house? They were all tenants. Renters on my property. And she was 3 months behind. I had the power to evict them all. The final showdown I didn't rush. I let the truth marinate. For days, Victoria strutted through Pine Valley like a queen convinced of her immortality, while the walls of her empire were already crumbling. Sarah filed motions. The sheriff, now with video evidence of arson, was forced to launch an investigation. Neighbors whispered in hushed voices, doubt dripping into the cracks of Victoria's lies. Finally, Victoria called for a mandatory emergency HOA meeting. The email dripped with authority: attendance required. Order will be restored. Perfect. Exactly what I was waiting for. That night, the Pine Valley Community Hall buzzed like a hornet's nest. Folding chairs creaked beneath uneasy neighbors. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. People avoided my eyes, nervous, unsure whose side to stand on. At the front, Victoria sat flanked by her lackeys, smug as ever. Her son Tommy sat behind her, pale and sweaty, avoiding everyone's gaze. She stood, voice sharp as broken glass. This community is under attack. An outsider is attempting to undermine our rules, destabilize our neighborhood, and steal what belongs to us. But I assure you, we are strong. We are united. And tonight, we will put an end to his interference once and for all." Polite applause trickled through the crowd. But it wasn't conviction. It was fear. Victoria gestured toward me. "Mr. Brennan, you may speak. But know this, you are outnumbered, and you are finished." I rose slowly, papers in hand. My voice carried steady through the hall. Dropping the first bomb, "Let's talk about transparency," I began. "Victoria claims to be protecting this community. So explain to me how you've collected $847,000 in dues in 6 months, from just 12 households. Where did that money go?" Gasps. Whispers. Heads turned. Victoria's smile faltered for the first time. "Irrelevant. Those funds are allocated for future development." "Future development?" I cut in. "You mean Mountain Vista Resorts? Because according to county records, you've already taken a $400,000 consulting fee." The room exploded. Neighbors shouted, faces red, papers waving. Victoria slammed her gavel against the table, her composure cracking. "Lies! Fabrications!" she shrieked. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. Dropping the second bomb, I pulled out a small flash drive. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet Tommy Ashworth. Here he is, at 12:47 a.m. last Tuesday, pouring gasoline on my lumber pile. Here's the license plate of his truck. And here's his face." The projector flickered to life. Gasps turned into outrage. Mothers pulled their kids closer. Jake, sitting in the back, let out a low whistle. Tommy buried his face in his hands. Victoria lunged for the gavel again, but the sheriff, standing silently at the door, stepped forward and placed a firm hand on her son's shoulder. The room fell into stunned silence. The nuclear reveal, I let it breathe for a long, heavy moment. Then I pulled out the manila folder from Uncle Silas's lockbox. My ace of spades. "You've called me an outsider," I said quietly. "But you should know something about my uncle. Silas didn't just own this cabin. Back in '98, he formed Brennan Holdings LLC. In 2010, he bought up the mortgage debt on every property in Pine Valley. Every single one." Gasps. Someone dropped their water bottle. "These aren't just papers," I continued. "They're deeds. Titles. Receipts. This land you're sitting on? These houses you live in? They don't belong to your HOA. They don't belong to Victoria. They belong to me." I let the words settle like thunder rolling across the mountains. "And Victoria, according to my uncle's records, you're 3 months behind on rent." The room erupted. Neighbors shouted, screamed, demanded answers. Victoria's face went from crimson to white to ash gray in the span of seconds. Her empire had just collapsed under its own weight. The fall of Victoria. The sheriff stepped forward, voice firm. "Victoria Ashworth, you are under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, harassment, and conspiracy. You will step down from your role immediately." The crowd surged with anger. Years of silent resentment now had a target. People shouted about hidden fees, bullying, threats they'd endured but never spoken aloud. Victoria tried to speak, but her voice was swallowed by the roar of the people she once controlled. Her son was led away in handcuffs. For the first time, the Queen had no throne. Aftermath. The weeks that followed were chaos, but the good kind. Investigators tore through the HOA's finances. Sarah guided me through every legal turn, ensuring Brennan Holdings was ironclad. Neighbors who had once avoided me now came knocking with casseroles and apologies. Jake and I rebuilt my lumber pile together, laughing like old friends. The Facebook group that had smeared my name transformed into a community page dedicated to rebuilding Pine Valley, this time without chains. And me? I sat on the porch of my uncle's cabin one evening, watching the sun bleed red across the mountains. The creek whispered below, the air smelled of pine and freedom, and for the first time in months, I breathed easy. Because sometimes, the land doesn't just hold trees and soil. It holds justice. It holds memory. And when the wolves come dressed as neighbors, it holds the strength to fight back. And I had fought. And I had won.